that if NDP 23 is moved, 24 can't be moved. So does anybody have a comment? Oh my goodness, Mr. Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a miscellaneous penalty provision of the bill, which basically says that every person that contravenes a provision of this Act for which no punishment is otherwise provided, it specifies then that there's automatically that these provisions will apply. And the first part is that they could be guilty of an indictable offense and liable to a fine of not more than $5 million or imprisonment for a term of 3 years or both. Or if they're proceeded with on summary conviction on a first offense to a fine of not more than $250,000 or imprisonment for a term of not more than 6 months or to both, and for any subsequent offense to a $500,000 fine or imprisonment for a term of not more than 18 months or to both. So interestingly, this is kind of the catch-all provision that says that anybody who violates this Act is automatically liable to potential imprisonment. And I just want to go on record as saying that that is inconsistent, and in fact I think it's incompatible with an approach that claims to be legalizing. I think it clearly is an approach that maintains the criminalized approach to cannabis, and so my amendment would seek, in keeping with that, to change the regulation of cannabis as we move to commercializing this product to make them guilty of an offense punishable on summary conviction only and liable for a first offense to a fine of not more than $3,000 and for any subsequent offense to a fine of not more than $50,000. Now, the interesting part about this section is I would assume that every offense under this Act for which the government thought was a significant offense, they specified a penalty. So this section obviously is for anything else in the Act that the government didn't even, after providing studying the bill and drafting it, did not think that an offense was necessarily appropriate to maintain or even to specify a penalty. So I find it instructive that the scheme of this legislation by the Liberal government is to say that any violation of this Act in any way results in a criminalized approach with a jail sentence, if the purpose of this bill is to legalize cannabis and to, as we've heard time and time again, move away from a prohibitionist approach that the Minister of Health and Minister of Justice say doesn't work, and which evidence before this committee showed creates much harm. So that's why the purpose of my amendment is to punish people who don't follow the scheme of the Act by monetary fines, much like the way we regulate tobacco and alcohol.
Thank you. Ms. Gladue.
Thank you, Chair. I want to provide some comfort to my colleague, Mr. Davies, because although I don't support the changes that he's proposed here, in Clause 45, you'll find that no summary conviction may be commenced after the expiry of 1 year after the day on which the subject matter of the proceedings arose. And right now the situation is, because the Justice Minister has not put in place adequate judges, we have court cases that are waiting 18 months to 3 years, and by the Jordan principle, murderers and sex offenders are going free. So the likelihood of anybody actually getting to court in time to get any conviction is less, and I just wanted to comfort him with that.
Mr. Davies, are you comforted?
Yeah, well, thank you for pointing that out, because it leads to another potential problem. We're dealing with Section 44 now, but Ms. Gladue is quite right to refer to Section 45, which says no summary conviction proceedings in respect of an offence under Section 44 may be commenced after the expiry of 1 year after the day on which the subject matter of proceedings arose, which leads to the potential situation where after 1 year, if a prosecutor is prohibited from proceeding by way of summary conviction, they will be forced to proceed by way of indictment or else have no offense whatsoever. So I think that's an important flaw to point out in the bill. Thanks, Ms. Gladue.
All right, thanks very much. Now, seeing no further speakers, I'm going to call for a vote on NDP 23.
All a recorded vote, Mr. Chair.
Sure, certainly.
Monsieur Ayoub. Mr. Yolson. Mr. McKinnon. Mr. Oliver. Ms. Sidhu. Ms. Gladue. Mr. Van Kesseren. Mr. Weber. Mr. Davies. Yes pour 1, nays contre 8, 8.
I declare NDP 23 defeated. Now we go to NDP 24. Mr. Davies.
Well, in short, this is a second attempt to try to amend the penalty provisions of the miscellaneous provisions of this Act, and this amendment would remove the indictable offence provision and leave the offence provisions that relate to summary conviction.
Okay, I see no further speakers. Call for a vote on NDP 24.
Recorded vote, Mr. Chair.
And we're going to have a recorded vote this time.
Monsieur Ayoub. Mr. Yolson. Mr. McKinnon. Mr. Oliver. Ms. Sidhu. Ms. Gladu. No. Mr. Van Kesteren. Mr. Weber. Mr. Davies. Yes pour 1, nays contre 8, 8.
Okay, I declare NDP 24 defeated. And now, shall Clause 44 carry? All those in favor of Clause 44 carrying, show of hands. All those opposed? Clause 44 is carried.